Okay, so we're recording. Welcome back to SD 555. That's what I call it anyway. Someday it will be officially called that, I think. We are relooking at our curriculum, rejiggering everything, and I think this will be, I'll probably end up teaching four graduate courses, 550, then this one. Then a course on gaming, turning models into games, and then my macro dynamics class. And I think that's probably what I'll just sort of do going forward, do on a schedule. We're not quite there yet with all the other stuff. I was arranging all weekend for undergraduate IQP teams to go out to New England SciTech to do their junior year projects. And that's just a whole other thing. Doesn't have anything to do with system dynamics or economics or graduate school or anything. It's undergraduate tomfoolery. But anyway, so welcome back. Today, let me share my screen. The syllabus continues to evolve and improve. So again, just real quickly, we started with the standard method, and there's that new paper on best practices you might want to take a look at. I think I mentioned it last time. Reference modes, to give us a picture of a problem statement. Multi-attribute scoring metrics. Not only do we want the model to mimic a reference mode, but we want to be able to compare reference modes or compare simulation experiments to the reference mode and to each other. So we need a scoring metric a lot of times, and that's very useful in a game. We talked about the conceptualization process, what should be in our model, what should be left out of our model. It relates to the problem statement and the reference mode. And we suggested that the social fabric matrix might be a useful tool for organizing our thinking, and that would get us, help to get us accepted by economists, at least heterodox economists. We talked about soft variables and aggregation briefly. We talked about the place for molecules, assemblies, generic structures, and archetypes in the whole scheme of things. Then we said the signature way of building a system dynamics model is to put a piece of structure into equilibrium and knock it out with a test input. So I created a little molecule for you all here where you can just pick the number from, was it 0 through 6 or something, to pick the different test inputs. A couple papers here that are well known by Jack Omer and John Moorcroft, where they're talking about partial model testing, taking a piece of structure and knocking it out with a test input. And their example is Forrester's market growth model. And people didn't seem to know what that was, so I put it up here, including a Stella version of it. We talked about first order control, right? And making sure our stocks don't go negative when they're not supposed to. And unlike 550, where there was just one very simple example of that, we said it really can be much more complicated than that. We use table functions and things. Hines et al. Using DT and model equations. I put that on there because a lot of these first order control formulations, molecules, use DT in the equation. And Forrester originally said in his Principles of Systems book, I have it over here on the shelf, explicitly a principle of modeling, system dynamics modeling, is never put DT in a rate equation, in a flow equation. And there was some lively debate here on, is that okay to do or not? And I think it is. I think Jay kind of conceded that probably, under certain circumstances, that's okay. Anyway, we talked about some more about table functions. We talked about it in the first course, but in this course, we looked at some mathematical gymnastics that we can use to think about the formulation of a table function. And, we don't necessarily statistically estimate these things, but you can use math and logic to pretty much nail down one of these things a lot of times. And, it, flies in the face of the criticism by Nordhaus against Forrester that world dynamics, measurement without data, I think it was called. And that he just didn't understand table functions. They're not ad hoc. And subjective and, well, all science is subjective, but they're not unscientific. Let's put it that way. We talked about delays and how there's material information delays. Got to use the right one in the right circumstance. And there's first, third, nth, and infinite order delays. We talked about expectation formation and some simple structures from the first course, or a simple structure from the first course, adaptive expectations. It had steady state error in it, or can generate steady state error, so we had to fix that. We looked at that simple arms race model from the first course, and we added this expectation structure that I used to help Roy Harrod out, actually a simpler version of it. We fixed that model's steady state error. And we looked at some other well-known sort of papers that can get you in a very sophisticated way, projecting the trends into the future. But then you get into, when you're using Taylor series, are you trying to model, doing math modeling, or are you trying to capture what people actually do? Do people actually do what Clark and Umholtz postulate here? And if they don't, do you want to put that in the model, even if it's more accurate, right? You might say that as a policy change, hey, use this rule instead of what you're currently doing, I suppose. We did talk about how some of the solutions for steady state error get us into the area of PID, proportional, integral, and derivative control. And we looked at some hardcore examples of that. And we said Bill Phillips was the person who sort of brought that into economics. And I don't think I mentioned this paper by George, I think this is a homework exercise from his graduate course at SUNY Albany. But you have a little macro model here, and you see government spending is just exogenous. So traditionally in economics, when you'd say, well, why is government spending exogenous? It always is. Why aren't there equations that say when the economy is doing something, government spending changes? In fact, that's what Phillips was saying, right? Is that, and here's a way to do it in a thoughtful way to stabilize the system. And the punt in economics was always, at least when I was a student, is, hey, if you want an equation that determines how this thing changes, make it endogenous, you got to talk to the political science department. So go down the hallway and talk to those people. In economics, we don't worry about that. That was always the punt. But at any rate, if you wanted to take that same model, George says, and add the PID stuff. So now here's government spending, you can see over here, right? And now it's all of this is PID. And it does, I guess he didn't do a simulation here, but for the homework, you can see how it stabilizes things. So I can't remember if I don't think I mentioned that.
No.
All right. Well, now I have. Then we talked about ordering functions. And actually, these are not part of chapter 17. So I think I have to shift this over. That was my bad. But these are just a progression of ordering functions that I put together for you all. And you should be noting that these things have material delays in them. They have expectations formation in them. They have first order control in them. So you say, aha, we're making bigger structures now that combine the smaller structures that we've previously studied. They're still not entire models, but hopefully you are beginning to see the progression of ideas, right? And hooking these contraptions together. All right, so that takes us to where we're going to kick off today, and this is coflows. We'll hopefully make our way through that. Attractiveness and resource allocation. Hopefully we'll get through that. And then we'll see if we get learning curves, diffusion models, and discrete formulations. And once we do all that stuff, we can start looking at building a model, hopefully employing where it makes sense as much of this stuff as we can. Sometimes we're not going to just stuff something in for the heck of it, but if it makes sense, we'll put it in. Okay. All right. So coflows. What is going on with coflows? Okay. So one of the issues with a system dynamics model, right, is that every item in a traditional stock is considered to be identical. Now, that's when you go over here, can everybody see the screen? This is the stock menu, right? I guess that's a menu. And you can see we have non-negative stock, we got conveyor, we got queue, we got oven, right? So what the heck do we mean by all this? Well, I think we discussed that non-negative stock is a legacy thing from the early days of Stella. It was put in there. I was told for when you're working with like managers in a consulting engagement, and they don't like to see, they fiddle around. They don't like to see stocks going negative. So, and they don't know first order control. So it was just a thing you click on and it takes care of it for you. So because they want the older models to be workable with the newer versions of the software, this is my understanding, they leave it in there. But it reflects poor modeling practice if somebody is using that instead of first order control formulations. But when we talk about everything being identical in a stock, we're talking about the second one here. That's the traditional stock. Forrester called them levels. He never called them stocks. And engineers, well, Forrester's an engineer, tend to call them state variables. So 3 ways of saying the same thing. That's the traditional continuous time modeling idea of a stock. And everything in that stock is considered to be identical. When you get into conveyors, queues, and ovens, now we're deviating from the system dynamics paradigm and adding discrete formulations into the model. And at the beginning, people would be like, oh, that violates Jay's pristine paradigm. We can't be doing that. But actually, if you read Industrial Dynamics, Forrester explicitly talks in the book about how it's okay to add discrete stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't violate any dynamic paradigm. But he argued we should always start with continuous time formulations and go from there. So conveyors, ovens, and queues are ways of handling more discrete kinds of issues. So everything's is treated as identical in a traditional stock, number one. And number two, order is not preserved. So Sturman used to stand in the front of the class when he'd teach us, and he'd pretend he had a giant, he'd say a canoe paddle in a big like pot cauldron, like a witch's cauldron or some such thing or whatever, a big giant pot. And he'd be stirring it with a canoe paddle, a mythical canoe paddle. And he argued that that's the way to think about it, that when stuff comes into a stock, it's mixed up and then released from the stock mathematically according to a probability distribution. And you get into Little's law and all that stuff. So a conveyor you would use if it's necessary to preserve order, right? That, like if you have a gluing process, something has to glue for an hour before it's finished, before it moves on in the assembly line, right? Then it does matter if the thing has arrived at the gluing station 1 minute ago or 59 minutes ago, right? And similarly, you have first in, first out, last in, first out accounting and stuff like that. So sometimes you do have to keep track of the order that things enter. Well, you'd use a conveyor in that instance. A queue is more queuing theory when it's supposed to be like a line at Disney where you're snaking through the rope system to get to the ride. That's what that type of queue. And so that's when you have arrivals somewhere. So parts are arriving at an assembly position in a manufacturing process, or runners are arriving at an aid station or a water station at a race, or customers are arriving at a teller's window at a bank or at a cashier's kiosk at Walmart or some such thing. And then ovens, a door opens, something goes in, the door closes, and you tell it how long to bake the whatever. It just stays in there however long, then the door opens and it leaves. So those are discrete-ish kinds of things, and not what we're talking about right now. It's this stock right here. All right, so everything inside of a traditional stock is considered to be identical, okay? And mixed together, so order is not preserved when it leaves. So if let's say that the thing that's in the stock is dollars or yen or euros or something, it doesn't matter. To say that they're all the same, and let's say it's electronic money. Let's say it's ones and zeros on a computer screen. I don't want to get into is a 1964 quarter worth more than a 1973 quarter. I don't mean that. I mean, that's a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. Are they identical? Yes. So the fact that they're treated as identical is just fine. Does it matter that the order is not preserved? That this dollar from Mike comes in, the dollar from Suzanne comes in next, the dollar from Najla comes in next, but then the dollar from Najla leaves first. No, it doesn't matter at all. So a lot of times it doesn't matter. But if it matters, if everything in the stock is not identical, that's really it's not so much the order, but it's the identical part. If that matters, then we have an issue. Now, when I say does it matter to the purpose of the model, right? If this is a stock of people, right? If all we're doing is counting the number of people, let's say it's in migration and out migration, and on net, how many people have entered the country or entered the state or entered my city or whatever it happens to be. And we don't care if they're young, old, rich, poor, male, female, whatever. We just are counting people. It doesn't matter. We acknowledge people are not all identical. They're tall, short, but for the purposes of the model, it doesn't matter. So it's fine. But if it matters, now Houston, we got a problem. What are we going to do? Well, let's say that this thing is people and we want it to be male and female. Okay. You could say the percentage of the people in there is female or whatever, or you could say, let's duplicate it. We have a stock of males and a stock of females. So that's a couple of ways right there of handling it. Of course, you can get into, well, we have males and females. We have rich, middle class, poor males, rich, middle class, poor females. We have different educational attainments for the rich, for the middle class, for the poor, for the men, the women. We have different heights. We have, different religious affiliations, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're saying, well, every time we do that, make more stocks, and then people can move among the stocks, you can go from rich to poor or poor to rich or whatever. Wow, it starts to get really nasty to lay all that stuff out, right? So at some point, it probably is no longer a system dynamics problem if all of that stuff is very relevant to the problem. So at some point you say, Uncle, it's just too much goofing around for this tool, and we want to switch to a different tool. But if we don't get to that level, if we have some characteristics of the things in the stock that are assumed to be identical that are important, but not so much so that we have to switch to a different modeling technique, what to do? So I mentioned we could make, different categories or whatever. But a common technique to deal with some of this is coflows. Okay. So what that means is that we want to know the average characteristic of the stuff in the stock. So the average salary of the people in the stock, the average educational attainment, in this case, the average interest rate associated with different debt instruments. Okay, so coflows are used to keep track of the average characteristic of the stuff in the stock because the stock considers them to be identical. Okay, so let's tap the brakes right now. This is a very important thing. We want to make sure we understand this. So everything in here, whatever it is, it says debt, it could be people. Let's say it's people. And we want to keep track of the average salary. And we have people moving into our state. We have people moving out of our state. And we want to know that once they're in here, they're identical, including salaries. Well, we know that's not true for the purposes of our model. What do? Well, we can do a coflow structure that says we can keep track of the average salary of the people in here in that example. Okay, in this example, it's average debt, excuse me, the average interest rate associated with different debt instruments. Now, why did I pick that example? That might be a little more murky than the population example I just said. So why am I bothering to do this, to use that example? Well, the reason is the guy who came up with this one is Jim Hines. So here's the original. It was never published, but it's a D memo. And it's a new co-flow equation. So you see, this is the D memo, and I just replicated this in Stella, right? And you can see, I mean, you probably didn't study the Stella model yet, but basically it's exactly the same. Here's the old co-flow structure, and here's Hines's revised co-flow structure. Okay, so that's why I picked debt and interest rates, because that's what he did in the original paper. I wanted to reproduce his original paper. Okay, so, all right. So if you study that D memo in this, you'll see they're identical. All right. So this is the traditional co-flow structure down here in system dynamics. Then this is Jim Hines's revision to it, and I just put them on the same, in the same model on the same graph, so you can see they're identical, right? So what we have here is we have somebody or some entity that's borrowing, and they're accumulating debt, and then they're slowly paying it off. Okay. And when they borrow, take out different loans, if you will, what's happening is the interest rate associated with those loans is different. Could be loans of a different maturation length, or the market has changed, the Fed has changed the federal funds rate, and all the interest rates have adjusted. So, you know, last month I borrowed at 2%. Now I'm borrowing at 3.5% because the Fed raised rates, whatever. Okay. So, so what's happening here is the borrowing is up here. So what did I do here? What did Jim do here? Let me move this out of the way. So borrowing is at 100. Let's see, what do we have here? And there's the interest rate that's associated with the latest debt. So as you're taking on new debt, there's a different interest rate. And I just use steps here to change it rather than smoothly changing or something. I just said there's different rates, rate hikes or whatever, just to illustrate that. So as borrowing is so borrowing here is 100, and it's copied down here. There's your 100, and it's just going in here. It's 100, so it's always borrowing at 100, but interest rates are changing. As new debt is being taken on, it comes with a different interest rate, okay? So what's happening here is, you know, you're accumulating the debt, and it's maturing and being paid off, but the debt is not identical. It has a different interest rate. So what we're going to do is measure the average interest rate of the debt inside of here. Okay. So the borrowing times whatever the current interest rate is, the newest interest rate, goes into increase in cumulative rate in the traditional molecule. Okay, and that's being accumulated here in the stock. Okay, and then what you do is, so you take the debt and the borrowing that's being accumulated, and then the borrowing with you're attaching the new interest rate or whatever the characteristic is as it comes in, and then you're making a ratio of the two and getting the average. So here I use safe div. Whenever I did this originally, a while ago, I rarely use safe div now. I just use the double slash. But you're just making a ratio of the two to calculate the average rate of interest associated with this debt. And then there's that molecule number 2 from the first course, right? Just stock divided by average lifespan, right? Tau, right? And so, and it's got first order control, right? When debt is zero, this thing is zero. And look at here, when you decrease the cumulative weighted interest rate, you're doing so at the average interest rate. So stuff comes in at the new interest rate, borrowing times the current interest rate, and it leaves at the average interest rate. The maturing flow, outflow leaves at the average interest rate. Now you can see here with the green line, we have the step function here of this 5% interest, then it goes up by 2, then it goes down by 4. So you see that boom, 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 like that. And then you can see in both instances the average rate changing to reflect the new interest rates, right? On average. Now, Hines in that paper says, oh, what he basically says is this concept here is a little weird. Like, what does that mean? Cumulative weighted interest rate. It's not horrifically bad to understand, but he's like, it's a little bit difficult to understand. So if you read the D memo, he goes through the math and the gymnastics, and he says we can do the same thing over here. So look at here. This is the same as this. So that's identical, right? But now he has the fractional borrowing rate. Again, I got this stupid safe div in here, which it's not stupid, but I did this a while. I must have done this a while ago because I haven't routinely used safe div in quite some time. But you see, you have borrowing divided by debt. We've seen that already. That's the fractional rate of change. Remember from the first course, right? We did fractional rate of change for births and deaths. I think it was births and deaths or addicts, new addicts and the addict quit rate or whatever it was. So that's just a ratio of a stock and its inflow, or the sum of all its inflows. There's only one. And over here, look at this. So now we have the new incoming rate of interest. And again, I'm spacing this out so you can see it better, hopefully. So we're subtracting the average interest rate and we're multiplying by the fractional borrowing rate. So really, this is that third molecule, sort of the adaptive expectation structure, right? I guess I should have had that in there, yeah. But instead of dividing by tau, we're multiplying by this fractional borrowing rate. And of course, that's, that's obviously, that's the same thing as, dividing one divided by alpha is the same thing as you can do the math and you'll have a fraction, so a decimal, right, to multiply by. So you can divide by it or multiply by that fraction. So two ways of doing the same thing. Okay, so either way, and Jim's argument was that, well, this is a much easier interpretation. Here's your average interest rate of the debt that's inside here, rather than this concept here, which is kind of weird. Okay. So, did I see somebody's high-fiving me? Who's that? Suzanne is high-fiving me, so go ahead.
So I get a little hung up and stuck on labels. The fractional thing, for whatever reason, always hangs me up. But essentially, that's just saying the percentage borrowing,
Yeah, you could say percentage. I was replicating Hines's paper.
I know that sometimes I get stuck on the labels. And then I was trying to figure out, well, in my head, I work with these problems with an example first, then the theory behind it. So if I had 3 rental properties that I acquired at different times and have different mortgages, you could use this to determine what is the average total debt of all 3 and the average borrowing rate. Is that what you're
saying? I suppose, yeah.
And so the debt at the very top, debt 1, which is in Hines's model, is an aggregate debt. I mean, because if you had one house, for example, that had $50,000 worth of debt at 3%, and then another house that had, $100,000 worth of debt at 7%, and a third house at, $125,000 at 5%, I mean, it makes a difference what the percentage is associated with the amount of debt. So I'm a little confused how that's going to be taken into account, or are we just generalizing a trend so that that really is beyond the bounds of the problem, that it doesn't really matter that much?
Probably the latter. I'm a little not following your last couple sentences. I mean, I don't
Well,
understand
I'm just
exactly what the
saying,
problem is.
I'm just saying that the amount of debt total with all three houses, you know, how much interest you're going to be paying is going to be determined by the interest rate associated with each rental property.
Yep.
And we're not associating it specifically with each rental property. We're just using, I'm
No,
just
right. So you're aggregating stuff. Yeah. So if you, or you could make a separate stock of debt for each rental property.
being a splitter, that would be probably what I would do. But I think the point you're trying to get us to think about is that is that really gonna, that level of detail really gonna be beneficial to the problem we're trying to solve? Is
Right.
aggregating the debt and the interest rate really gonna be that different from getting into all the nauseating detail for whatever our problem is? That's the tool we're trying
So-
to, right?
Right. So if that was the sole extent of the, you know, the issue, you have three rental properties or whatever it is, then I would just probably, each one would be its own, possibly identical, but with different parameters, sector, subsector, whatever, because that's not ridiculous. But if you had, you know, if you were BlackRock buying a property all over the country and you had 170,000, now you could use a raise in Stella. That's another way to handle that. But it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, I guess. Right. So
It depends on the problem we're modeling. And I think this is a good example of whether or not that level of detail is necessary to the problem.
and to be honest with you, we're the interest is being continuously compounded here.
Right.
In this system. And if you want it compounded once a month or once a year or once every 6 months or something, now it's more discrete. Right. So it depends on the purpose of the modeling.
Okay.
Right. So Jay would
I
say,
get
you
it.
know, we're not trying to, if you want to, you know, get an exact number for the interest you'll pay over the life of the loan, and you know, use Excel or, you know,
Right.
use a discrete. He says, but that's not what we're trying to do with this. We're trying to step back to the investment banker level and look at the overall system and how it's configured together, right? And look at redesigning the airplane.
I guess another example, just because I think through these things and how you can use these tools with examples better, you know, this might be something I could try and you could look at, but like, let's talk about the value of education and how much debt you come out of veterinary school with, and how many veterinarians are straddled with so much debt that they're committing suicide because they can't pay it off with the $60,000 a year jobs they get. So you could use something like this in a really stepped back global sort of look at that particular problem of graduate debt and how much that might be contributing to the veterinary suicide rate.
Okay, very dark problem.
Yeah,
there.
it's a reality. It's a reality, but
Yeah.
this would be a model you could use for that. You could use these tools to explore that problem.
Okay.
Could
All
you?
right. So yeah, I mean, if you
Okay.
can define it, you can model it, right?
Okay.
All right. So hopefully we're getting the general idea here that, you know, a traditional stock, everything's assumed to be identical and order is not preserved. With the everything assumed to be identical thing, sometimes that doesn't work, and we need ways to deal with that. This is one way. It's not the only way, but it is one way to keep track of the average characteristic of something that's in a stock. Okay. And this is the traditional structure, and this is the Heinz's revised structure or way of doing the same thing, which he claims is more transparent. Right? Yes, Nejla.
Oh, just a quick question. What are the co-flows? Is it the debt 1 and 2, or is it the average interest rate 1 and 2?
Well, this is the cold flow right here, not this. So it's going along for the ride with the debt. And from this, you're able to calculate the average value of something in here. So,
Okay.
okay.
Mhm.
All right. So, very good. What next? Well, sometimes it's more complicated. What do we have here? So now we do have people, right? So we have here, this is, let's see, increase, over here, labor force. Even though I build these models, I sometimes don't remember. I have so many models I've built and been goofing around with, I don't always remember instantly what I did. So in this case, we have people are being hired into a labor force or employees, whatever you want to call it. And there's attrition. Some people, they retire, they're dismissed, they go on maternity leave, they whatever. So, and there's just some fraction of these folks go away. It's very simple, right? Now, we're keeping track now of their experience, because experienced employees are usually much more valuable than inexperienced employees because they know what they're doing, right? So we're not saying experience doing what. The model is silent on that, but there's some average years of experience. I think it's in years. I don't remember what I say here. Weeks. Average weeks of experience, okay, in doing whatever it is. So here's our co-flow. It's our hiring rate. This would be the same thing as borrowing in the last model. And the average experience in new hires is like the interest rate on the new debt. Okay, and they're going into total effective experience. I might have got this one from Sturman. I can't remember. This a while ago. When people come, they bring their experience with them. And then when they leave, there's some attrition. They're leaving at the average rate of experience. So here's that average, labor force, total effective experience, that average, that's that ratio, right? That's like the average interest rate. And then we said when they leave, I could have stretched a link over here, but I don't like crossing pipes. If I can help it, actually, I probably should have done this because I don't like crossing lines, but I can help it. Instead, I made a ghost over here. So there's an attrition rate. So here's their attrition. They're leaving the firm or whatever, retiring or whatever. So they're attriting and they're dragging along their average experience. That's from before, right? Does everybody see that is this? Right. So instead of the new interest rate, it's the new person. We're not borrowing, we're hiring, and the new people are bringing in their experience, and then we're accumulating the experience. Here are the employees. Here's the accumulated experience. Here's the average experience. And then when people leave, when the debt matures, they leave at the average experience level, right? Okay. However, while they're here, before they leave, what's happening? They're gaining experience, right? So here we have the labor force over here, and we're saying, every week they're here, they're learning more, right? Weeks worked per year is 50 weeks per year. Oh, they only get 2 weeks vacation. Geez. And that's the labor force times their weeks worked per year. Okay. And that accumulates in here. Okay. And there can be a decay rate here. So, your skills can atrophy. Okay, so and it atrophies again, when it leaves at the average rate. So we have, if that's much more sophisticated, right? So you have, while they're here, so it's not just they're bringing experience and leaving with it. While they're employed, they're gaining experience, although they can have some level of decay. Because you don't do something for a while. I know with me, I'm like, how the hell do you do that again? I haven't done that recently, right? Okay. So same idea, but a little more sophisticated. Okay, so again,
Very cool.
Okay, so everybody is like, okay, I get it. It's, Okay, so again, if we circle back here, so here's the new CoFlow structure, the paper and the model. Now here's that non-conserved CoFlow structure. I don't know why I titled it that. All right, so you should see this is building on this. All right, now what? Well, I mentioned several times Ann Johnson, our new PhD graduate from last May, one of two new PhD graduates. She has turned herself into an excellent modeler and has done a superior job for a dissertation. Very, very, very good. At one point, so this is not her finished model by any means. This was early in the game, and we'd meet weekly and she'd be conceptualizing. I'd make suggestions and whatever. Well, at one point, I said, you really need morale of your troops. This is a battle for Moscow. It's the Germans against the Russians in World War II. And I said, anybody knows anything about the military or watches war movies knows that morale is very important. They often have a morale officer, right, on board a ship or something like that, right? So if your troops are discouraged, they don't want to be there, they don't fight very hard, right? And if they're gung-ho, their morale is high, that they're much more apt to kick butt, right? Now, that's ceteris paribus. Do they have ammunition? Like you can be gung-ho, but if you don't have any bullets for your guns, that's no good, right? And or are you starving? So you're exhausted because you don't have food. The rations didn't make it. So there's all this stuff going on in her model. But she was a little bit at a loss as to how to model morale. So I said, let me take a crack at it and we'll circle back. So here's what I did. I first showed her that previous thing I just showed you guys. And here's what we came up with. So we have cumulative weighted morale, okay? And we have increases to the weighted morale when you have new troops that are being called. So remember I said she used ordering functions. I got her to use ordering functions. So when you need more troops, you're ordering them from other places, either back at headquarters or from other places on the battlefield. Get over here, or they're invading, they're breaking through the line, So you're ordering troops. And the new troops in this case that are coming from, like basic training and stuff, they have a higher level of morale. They haven't been on the front lines yet and, been beaten down and all that stuff. So they're arriving with new morale. Okay. And then when they are killed or wounded and they go off the battlefield, they take their average morale with them. If you're dead, obviously that's that. And even if you're wounded, you're not participating in the conflict anymore. You're leaving active battle, so you're leaving with the average morale. And then what we put in here was some psychological stuff, which is interesting, and that is basically this is analogous to while you're there, you're learning, you're getting experience, you're bringing experience to the workforce, you're leaving with it, but then while you're there, you're gaining experience. Well, so you're bringing it when you're a new guy. You're leaving with it if you're killed or wounded. But while you're there, instead of gaining experience, in this case, you're you're losing in this formulation, you're losing morale. When are you losing morale? Well, you're becoming aware of in this case, the casualty rate. Okay. So you're saying, geez, a lot of our guys are getting smeared here. I'm probably going to be next. Looks like we're losing. This is no good, right? And your morale starts to fall. Okay. Now, in this particular formulation, I don't think we, I was trying to teach her, I was showing her the other thing, and I said, do something like this. I don't think there was an increase yet, but that would be if you're winning, you're kicking butt, your morale starts to get high, right? So, you know, when your new guys are bringing their morale, gung-ho from boot camp, when they're killed or injured and off the battlefield, they're leaving at the average rate. If they feel they're losing, they're depressed, they're gonna, while they're there on the battlefield, they're losing morale, and then wins would help them. So he could have made a buy flow here. I can't remember exactly. This is the one that I had in my files, so this is the one I'm showing you. But it could go, but wins are gonna raise it, and you know, as you think you're losing, it's gonna reduce it. Okay. All right, let me show you another one here. So hopefully you're getting the idea that it's a fairly straightforward, you know, the simple Heinz kind of thing, straightforward thing, but it can get more complicated as you go along, right? So this is, did I show you this before? The ham radio model I'm doing? Okay, so model 703. Anyway, long story, but I started looking at the future of ham radio with System Dynamics and trying to show these people at the national headquarters for ham radios in Connecticut, and they're all a Twitter over getting young people involved in ham radio, because if you go to the ham, they call them hamventions, conventions of ham radio operators, they're all in wheelchairs and with oxygen tanks and canes and walkers, and they all say, we need young people, and you know, and you get into, well, they got into being hams years ago because somebody told them, hey, you can talk to people on the other side of the world. And back when I was a kid, you'd be like, what? Holy crap. That's, I mean, you knew it was possible, but horribly expensive. And, you know, how do you do it? You know, so when I was a kid, you didn't, if you did wanted to talk long distance to somebody, you usually did it at like on a Sunday night when it was cheaper, and you had like a watch there, and you were watching to, you know, after 2 minutes, the rates went way up. So you had to say, and goodbye. So today, you know, it's no big deal, right? You have a cell phone, which is a radio, and you pick this stupid thing up, and you know, so getting kids interested in ham radio by telling them, hey, you can talk to other people around the world, doesn't get it done, right? It's really wireless communications now. It's a way to start learning what, you know, self-driving cars and robots and stuff like that. And cell phones and all that. So if you're interested in that sort of technology, then, so anyway, so these guys are fretting at the national headquarters. And I said, well, you know, we have a way of thinking about this stuff. And they're like, what? But most of them are electrical engineers anyway. So when I started saying feedback loops and whatever, they're like, ooh. So anyway, I started building a model, and I haven't finished it, but it's kind of neat. Anyway, I got some data. Oh, sorry. I didn't share. I was unsharing. I got to share again. So I got a hold of some data from the national office, and you can see here we have total ham radio operators from 1997 to last year. And then in ham radio, there's 3 different classes, 3 different licenses that you can get, technician, general, and extra. Those are the newest classifications. And then there's some older licenses that they no longer grant. And those, as you can see here, are going away because these guys are dying off. And then here's membership in the ARRL. That's the National Organization for Ham Radio, the American Radio Relay League. So you can see they gave me the data and I was able to fit the model to the data. We haven't gotten into calibration yet, but I calibrated the model to the data. But we're talking now about, or we're supposed to be talking about coflows. So real quick, the model, it's not finished, so sorry it's not, but real quick here, we have the ham sector. Those are the ham radio operators. We have the local ham radio support sector. Those would primarily be your ham radio clubs. So what university has the oldest active on-the-air ham radio club in the country?
Harvard.
Good guess.
MIT.
Sort of near there. MIT. No. WPI. It's called WIPPY-WA. We're the oldest on-the-air collegiate ham radio club in the United States. How about them apples, huh? We beat MIT. MIT chartered first, but we got on the air before them. They had some technical whatever. We're talking like 1912. So whatever was happening back then. So we're the first collegiate one in the nation. So these are like your clubs. I don't even know what I have here. So what I have, the club sector doesn't have anything much in it right now. It's a placeholder. And then I have an Elmer sector. So what is an Elmer? Well, back in the 1970s, somebody wrote an article in one of the ham radio publications and was talking about how they learned ham radio, and they were helped by an older ham whose name was Elmer. Literally, his name was Elmer. So to this very day, if you are a veteran ham and you help a new ham, you're called an Elmer. It's a mentor. So your mentor in ham radio is called an Elmer, and it's called Elmering, helping people. So, and then there's the non-local support sector. So that's your ARRL, social media, YouTube videos and stuff, and ham fests. Okay, and so in here, we got the league, and, they have their membership. And what else do I have? I got a little bit of accounting in here. Their financials, they offer products. You can buy their stuff, different products. What else do I got in here? I can't remember. Their marketing and outreach, nothing in there. Oop. Member satisfaction. Oh, so that's attractiveness or satisfaction. They have employees they have like 80 some employees down in Newington. Aries is public service. There's nothing in there yet. That's if there's a disaster, the hams help. Okay, so anyway, that's the non-local stuff. But we're getting the co-flows. So here's the ham sector. So the ham sector is kind of big. And here's what's going on. So we have people studying for the first exam, because you can't be a ham unless you pass these tests to get your licenses. Okay. And then here are new inactive technicians. They have gotten their first license. And one of the issues is that 9 out of 10 new technicians, they study for and pass the test. They never get on the air. So they leave the hobby. Then we go over here. These are technicians that get on the air. Okay. And then some of them disengage and are inactive. They still have their license. They just don't do anything. And some of them, their licenses just expire, and that's that. Or if you're a silent key in ham radio, that means you're psh. So you're an Elmer or a silent. You can be an Elmer that becomes a silent key. Then what happens is your widow takes all your stuff and says, anybody want my husband's radio junk? And everybody like descends like locusts onto the person's house and says, I'll take that. I'll take that. Anyway, And then some of them become active again. They get reinvigorated and they get on the air again. And then they become the active folks become silent key. Now, if in ham radio, if you study for and pass the next exam, you become a general. Why would you want to do that? Because it's kind of hard. Well, because you get more privileges. So the Federal Communications Commission gives the hams privileges on areas of the radio frequency spectrum. They're reserved for us. A few of them we have to share with like the Coast Guard and stuff, but mainly they're for us. And the hams have set up a system that says the more you learn, the more we'll let you play on, the more areas of our spectrum that we have privileges on you can use. So general, you can use more. And then the last one is an extra, and you can use all of the ham wherever we have privileges. You can use it all. So it's very prestigious to be an extra.
Let me guess, you're an
everybody on the-
extra.
Huh? Sorry, what? I didn't hear.
Let me guess, you're an extra.
Yes, I am an extra. So if you're talking on an extra band area, then you're only talking to extras and nobody else is allowed, right? Whereas if you're on bands that everybody can use, nobody knows if you're an extra. They can look you up, but you're sort of mixed in with the proletariat. So there's some snobbiness, but they're trying to motivate you to learn more. Is long story short, and it's the same structure here. So some of them get discouraged, they become inactive, they reactivate, they die, their license expire and they don't renew, or they can be active and pass away, silent key, and so forth. And then you have the legacy dudes and gals, mostly dudes. Somewhere here, I got the legacies. Where do they go? Down here. And they got their license. They have different kinds of licenses. They're not current or anything, but they're still allowed to use them. And then the same kind of activity happens. Now, why am I, other than, hey, I'm into it, so now you had to hear about it. Why am I telling you this? Well, one of the big hoopty-doos with the league, the national office, is we got to get, as I said, young people into the hobby to become hams. And the average age of a ham is like 70. So over here, so I'm using CoFlows. So you can see the average age of a ham here. Move this stuff a little bit here. Make it bigger so you can see. What do I got it here is 62, 63. So I think I'm a little low here. I think I got to boost it up a little bit, but I was kind of guessing because I don't have data on everything. But this is directionally correct. Maybe it's a little bit higher. This blue curve should shift up a little bit. And I have the average age of all the various stocks down here, right? So all of this stuff here is CoFlows to this. So, when somebody starts studying for the test or becomes a technician or becomes a general, they have to bring their age with them as they get to the next level of ham radio. But while they're there, they're aging. Some people die a technician. They're a technician for 30 years. They never take the other tests. Some people go to general and never advance, and they just age while they're there, right? And so forth. And, it's similarly down here there's other CoFlow stuff that had to happen here in order to make it all work out. So I don't expect everybody to understand all of this at the moment, other than this is a generalizable, bigger thing of what we just looked at with Ann, the morale, or with the employees and gaining experience and so forth. So this is just for age. So if you wanted to have something like enthusiasm or morale or, whatever, you need to do this all again, another CoFlow structure, right? And as you might imagine, at some point, it's going to get ridiculous. So you have to be careful. This is why we don't model the system. We model problems, right? We try to. So one of the big problems is the hams are getting old. They have their wheelchairs and oxygen tanks and canes and stuff at the conventions, and they keep railing, we need younger people in the hobby. So that's why I took the time. It took me a while to make sure that was tight, right? So just saying this CoFlow thing looks innocent in the simplest case, but it can get rather complicated as you go along. Okay, so it was Najla, go ahead.
What part was the CoFlow? Because isn't that an ordering function if people have to go through different stages? Isn't that an ordering
No,
function?
it's not an order. No, so it's sort of a material delay chain, but it's not an ordering function because nobody's ordering extras. Get me more extras. It's up to you if you want to study for and pass the exams. So it kind of looks like it, but it's more, think of it as material delays, but it's not like a third order delay or just an nth order delay where n is equally allocated to each of the stages. You can sit for 20 years as a general before taking your extra test or whatever. So you really have to explicitly model it all. But in terms of the just visually looking quickly at because I didn't go into every detail and I didn't even pan out or pan in, so it's bigger, easier to read. I just wanted to give you the big picture on that model. Visually, it does look like an ordering function or at least a material delay chain of some sort, right? So sometimes you get a first impression from the visual, the StockFlow nomenclature that we use, but then you have to do a little bit of a deeper dive to figure out what's going on, right? So the ham thing is just to show you that the CoFlow thing can be very complicated, and the principle is the same. As they move from technician to general, they're taking their age with them. And if they stick at general for a while, they age. Rather than getting experience there, they're aging, right? And then they move to inactive status or to extra or whatever, right? So the principles are the same. You just have to keep track of everything. Long story short. Okay.
Would it be possible, Mike, to that was all one gigantic model? Would it be maybe simpler to divide it up into sectors, people that had achieved a certain level of certification?
Yeah, so
and have it be
how
visually
modular do you make a model?
right.
Yeah, you could do it, and then there's nothing that says you can't do that. I modularized it because you saw I did have in some of the stuff I just had a single item in it, or even nothing in it, so I haven't. But it's sort of my conceptualization from being a ham, but also talking to the people at the league. Right now, there's elections, so there's this big. Who would think the politics of ham radio? So right now, there's these two giants in the field of ham radio who are battling to become the New England director. And it's like this just arm wrestling thing. They have campaign buttons and flyers, and I'm getting emails every day from please vote for me, and but they show up and lobby you, and they tell you all the problems or whatever. So I'm building the model in my head as I'm hearing all this stuff, right? And so then my conceptualization, if you will, is in some sense almost a consulting thing because I'm listening to the senior people. And so one of the big controversies, by the way, down at the league right now is two. They do a lot of lobbying. One is the high frequency trading world. They're trying to use radio waves to get their electrons to the market quicker than fiber optics. And they're trying to purchase spectrum right next to the hams, but they're going to have giant transmitting devices and they're going to bleed over into our space. And so the league is lobbying Congress to not let them do that, to not sell that spectrum to the high frequency traders. And the other thing is homeowners associations. Does anybody live in a homeowners association? evil. Because they don't want antennas anywhere. Well, hams need antennas. So it's you should see the stuff that people do. They put up a flagpole to be patriotic, but really it has their antenna. It's their antenna mast. Or they're running it through their gutters and along their fence line, or they got it in their attic, or all this stuff. But the league is lobbying Congress to say, hey, you know, the FCC says you can have the spectrum, so therefore you got to let them have an antenna to use it, right? So homeowners associations can't be, you know, restricting people. So they do stuff like that. So it's a big, you hear all this stuff. But the big thing you hear is they're swinging their canes. We need young people. You know. So the age thing is a big deal. And, you know, so I had to model that and figure out how to do that. I think I got it right. I mean, there's a lot going on there. You can see, just, you didn't even look at the details of that model, but you can imagine if you're not careful and not testing pieces and whatever, it can easily go awry. And then you're like, where's the problem? I got weird ages here and I don't know where the hell the problem is. You can eventually find it, of course, but it just takes you forever if you haven't done it right. And even still, it's a little bit, I'm fingers crossed I didn't make a mistake. You get tired or whatever. Yes, Najla.
This isn't system dynamics, but it's just more of a marketing tip. Have you considered making it a multi-level marketing strategy and requiring, for instance, like generals to recruit a certain number of technicians to the field and so on?
Call me
Good
Professor
idea.
Ponzi. I don't, have I considered it? No. Have they? I don't know. They're trying to get into grade schools, give away free radios. They're doing all sorts of stuff, but yeah, you're supposed to Elmer people, and what they do talk a lot about is don't drive new people away by when they come to a club meeting, ignore them. If they ask for help, blow them off. Like, don't do that. But rather, I don't know that anybody's been asked to recruit people. Well, I mean, they always say, hey, if you know somebody who'd be interested in the hobby, bring them to a meeting, but nobody's given me a quota yet. Although the biggest barrier, honestly, seems to be the tests. It's supposed to be fun, like it's a hobby, but you have to take tests. And people go, that's not fun.
It seems like there would be a
tests
big
are hard. Well, the technician's not so bad. The other two are hard. The general's hard, and the extra is like, I damn near had to become an electrical engineer to pass that friggin' thing. It was like, oh my God.
It seems like emergency management students, would be interested in this, because clearly every time we have these big catastrophes, hurricanes, earthquakes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we help at the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon, Chicago Marathon, parades, stuff like that, So, yeah, I mean, people see ham radio is so vast. You can do satellites, you can bounce signals off the moon, you can talk to the astronauts on the space station, you can build radios and amplifiers and antennas, you can help an emergency. There's all different things you can do. So people are attracted for a variety of reasons. Some hams never, ever, not once go on the air and speak. They like to build stuff. They like to build radios or build antennas or whatever. So it just depends on what your thing is. But yes, there's a segment of people who are motivated by doing some public service, which is how I got into it, helping in times of emergency. And there are a lot of preppers who are into it. They're worried about Mad Max and Armageddon and all that stuff. And although they're not necessarily incorrect, I mean, when the towers go down, cell towers go down, I mean, whether it's from an ice storm or civil unrest or whatever, or, New York City Marathon, cell towers were up. There was no civil unrest. It was a joyous thing. Try and make a cell phone call. The circuits are overloaded, right? You can't get through. So how do you find your runner or whatever? Well, you got, if you're hams, get them on the radio, right? So, or the race organizers and the crews that are shagging runners or medical attention, or they need more Gatorade or whatever, you can't get them. Cell phones don't work. They're overloaded. So you got to do something else, right? So it can be a positive thing, not necessarily an emergency, but or a kid is lost in the woods, helping out with that sort of thing. Anyway, so I don't want to do too much ham radio stuff because this is not a ham radio class. But I just wanted to show you a larger scale model, even though it's not finished, that uses the co-flows, but it can get quite complicated depending on, normally I would be like, oh, for the love of God, I'm not going to do all that work. But the big issue is this age thing. So it had to be done. Okay. We press on. What time is it? Okay. We're making progress here. So good for the hams, ham and eggs, all good. Let's see. So we want to go here. All right, so we press on. Oh, there are a few. So there's a Future Ham Radio, Battle for Moscow. There's a few documents I put up here that are useful for looking at other twists and turns on the. I think this one's pretty good. I'm trying to remember. I think this one. There's a whole 20 some pages here of stuff on how to build co-flows. So here's the traditional co-flow structure, right? And I haven't looked at this in a while. Oh, and then they got the Heinz revision here. And now it's getting more complicated. This is not as complicated as the ham example, but you can see it's starting to get more. They give you the equations and stuff. So that's maybe I got that one here. I can't remember. Or I got it from Sturman, and Sturman got it from here. I can't remember. But they give you all sorts of examples. See, it's getting more complicated. So you have different career assignments, executives, first line management, and then salaries. You're getting your raises as you go along, and so forth. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on it. We get it. With the again, you got to study these things. I just introduce you to these concepts, and I lead you to the stream to drink. But whether you drink or not is up to you. All right. So the next we press on: attractiveness and resource allocation. Okay, what the heck is going on here? Again, I put up a discussion from years ago where somebody posed a question: how do I, allocate a scarce resource? And all the luminaries weighed in. And it's a fascinating discussion of all the superstars in system dynamics and their different opinions on how to properly model something. Okay. So I urge you, when you got a chance, to take a look at that, because it's kind of delightful and informative at the same time to see these senior people, because you think the senior people are all geniuses and they all know everything, right? And then you're looking at us like, wow, they're like going after one another. Like that's a crappy formulation. I disagree with that. That's no good. So what are some well-known ways of allocating a scarce resource? Okay. And why is the title here resource allocation and attractiveness? Well, you'll tend to allocate a scarce resource to its more attractive use, or more important use, or priority use, or whatever you want to say. So these concepts are related to one another. Okay. So how about simple? What's kind of the simplest way to do it? And by the way, simplest does not mean bad. It can be used in many, many circumstances. And I can't remember if I opened up the, no, I didn't. Well, I'll show you this, and then I'll talk about the thing I didn't find and open. And if you're not understanding me, I'll find it and open it. All right, so what do we have here? So we have a limited resource, okay? And we have demand number 2. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Demand 1 demand 2, and demand 3. So there are 3 things that want the scarce resource: people, time, money. Okay. And it has to be allocated among the 3, the limited resource. So here we have 50 unit lists. It's 50 people, $50, 50 minutes, or whatever the case may be. Okay. So let's see. Demand number 1 is 10. Demand number 2 is 20. Demand number 3 is 30. So that's 60. So there's more demand than there is supply, right? So how is it allocated? Okay, well, the simplest way to do it is to sum up the 3 demands, 1, 2, and 3. That's your total demand. And then put each demand in the numerator. I mean, I guess I could have used 2 slashes here to make it robust. I think I did this originally in Vensim and I just opened it up. I didn't take the time to convert it. But then you get the fractional allocation. Fractional to 2, to 1, and to 3. And then you multiply the fraction times the limited resource. So here's the fraction to 1 times the limited resource, right? Fraction to 2. Here we go. Over here times the limited resource. And similarly to 3 and the limited resource. So you can see the fractions here. Now, what I should have done and didn't do, shame on me, is I probably should have said, let me get a graph here and say, all right, demand 1 and amount of resource to 1. Yep. Undo that. Okay, so 1 is not getting everything 1 wants, right? And you could similarly do that, right? These don't have to be this big. Sorry. You know, similarly, we can say, all right, I want to know what did 2 ask for and what did 2 get. So where is it? Demand 2 is here. And the amount that was given to 2 is there. And then, of course, when you don't have enough for everybody, you got to allocate it, you know. So the demand number 3 is this, and the amount to 3 is that. Okay, so nobody gets exactly what they want, and it's proportionally allocated. Okay, so if demand 3 was, what, 20? Now everybody gets what they want. I should have made this, taken the time to make that bigger so you can see. Because they demand and supply were the same, right? But if there's not enough to go around, it has to be allocated, right? Okay, how are we doing so far? Everybody sees that, gets that? Okay. So that's pretty simple. And sorry, I knew I was going to say something else. So one way I use this technique a lot is when I'm going to make a game. And when people are going to be, instead of putting down parameters that sum to 1, so 20% here, 30% there, 50% there, it sums to 1. If people in a game are putting in whatever they want, right, for their demands, you use this to make sure that the game isn't supplying more than it can, that it's meeting demands with resources it doesn't have. So you can allow people to order what they want, but then they get they don't exceed the capacity of the game. So this is a very useful, there would be some kind of slider or something, or button or something that would be generating the demands by the player. And whatever they put in, it doesn't blow up the system or do something silly. So that's a good use of this in a game. Okay. I was going to open and show you that, but I think everybody pretty much understands. Go ahead, Najla.
Yeah, I was just curious as to like a practical application of this, because like, let's say, like if the players knew that they're going to be allocated whatever percentage their demand is of total demand, like if they're aware, then isn't that going to lead to some sort of a competitive race where they're just going to, consistently order over the top demand or over the top orders?
Right. Okay. And what is the title of this particular formulation?
I can't see it in my screen.
Okay, so it's the simplest one. It's not very sophisticated. Right? So yes, if there's that sort of stuff that's happening, then you have to account for that. Now, where an example of this would be is like the Battle for Moscow in Anne's thing, for example. Captain so-and-so needs 20 more, and Colonel so-and-so needs 17 more and whatever, but you don't have enough troops to go around. So you got to allocate them. Now this allocates them proportional to the demand. But what if somebody really, like if I need 20 more troops and I have to hold this bridge, and if the bridge gets captured by the bad guys or the other side, we are screwed. Whereas if the other guy's position is overrun, that's very sad, but it doesn't jeopardize the whole mission. My position is overrun, we're screwed. The army can't get across. So there's a higher priority to my demand than somebody else's demand. Well, this can't handle that. And if you read the discussion, right, in this document here, resource allocation formulations, that's brought up. It's like, yeah, that's okay. I mean, it's okay. It's not a horrible thing. And for certain simple things, perfectly fine. But if you need more sophistication, that doesn't necessarily get the job done. Okay. So we press on. How about bean attractiveness formulation? What in the heck does that mean? Hopefully I can remember. Did I even open that? Oh, yes, I did. Okay. So why do I call this the bean? What did I call it? The bean attractiveness formulation. Well, it's because it was shown to me on the order of 35 years ago or something by Michael Bean, who runs Forio Consulting. So he was a student at, I was already a professor at WPI, so I had completed my formal education, but he was a student at MIT, PhD student, but we were in Sturman's class. And one day we were talking about formulations and he goes, oh, I do it this way. And he showed me this particular formulation. Okay, so it's now I'm using an attractiveness example, because remember I said in some sense, the allocation of a scarce resources, it goes to the more attractive or important use. So this is kind of in that genre. So over here, we have a product that has some level of attractiveness or relative attractiveness. Okay, so relative to here, hey, over here, I'm more attractive, more important, right? And this could be product attractiveness, or what do I have here? I can't remember what I have. Relative price. So if my ceteris paribus, if mine is cheaper than yours, I win. Delivery delay. Yeah, yours is cheaper, but I'm going to get you mine right away. So it could be that, well, I'm willing to wait a little longer for a Tesla because I really want a Tesla. But what if I'm hungry and this is a restaurant? And, it's the one restaurant says, yeah, my price is lower, but you got to wait for 45 minutes to be seated. And the more expensive restaurant says, I'll seat you immediately, right? Like, I'm hungry now. I think I'm going to go with the restaurant that's going to get me in sooner. So I move this around in real time here. So relative delivery delay. So here I have expected delivery delay, and this is just a constant. I called it expected delivery, but it's a constant. And normal delivery delay, or my delivery delay versus my competitor's delivery delay. You could do that. So it's a relative measure, just like I said here, what our price, their price. I'm just trying to give different interpretations or ways you could think about. So here I had an hours and theirs. Here I have expected and normal, this sort of thing. Who's high-fiving me? Go ahead, Suzanne.
This looks like another way potentially of modeling decisions, or maybe framing it as options, but it's still kind of a decision-making structure too, right?
Well, you'd have to ascertain what goes into making a product attractive, what goes into making a city attractive, what goes into making a university attractive, what goes, whatever the thing is. And it's almost always multi-attribute, right? And so you'd have to identify the important attributes and smear them together into a, well, in this case, an attractiveness function. Right. But then the attractiveness would be used to allocate customers between iPhone and Android, or Coke and Pepsi, or whatever the case may be, or living in Minneapolis or living in St. Paul, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah. What is the function of the little double circle and our price and price product attractiveness?
So as you can see, if you right click here and say module provides output.
So it's a stock, another way of representing a stock?
No, it's outputting to another sector.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So it's probably,
Okay.
so here it's coming in here. So it's
Okay.
receiving or accepting input. So now they're comparing the two prices, their price and our price. So their price is product one's price. This is product two.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, so this is the attractiveness is identical on this side. And then you get into the same thing we just saw, right? Where we have the total attractiveness now. Before it was total demand for one, from one, demand from two, and demand from three. Well, here we have total attractiveness of the two products, and then the fractional or relative attractiveness. Again, I must have done these in Vensim originally and converted them to Stella, because Stella smears, doesn't put any spaces between things, and I think it's very hard to read. So, and then here's your total market demand, and it's allocated according to the relative attractiveness, just like the scarce resource was allocated proportionally. So it's that same allocation mechanism. In this case, it's allocating customers, I guess you'd say. So the market share, here's the percent market share. Coke versus Pepsi, or whatever the case may be, right? Do I have any? I guess I don't have any graphs here. Maybe do I? Oh, I have graphs out here. Okay. So yeah, so you run it. In this case, the market share is 45 and 54, or 46 and 54, whatever you want to say. Dividing up the market based on all those factors. Now, going back in here, notice I have the strength of each of the attributes is the same. Now, if you wanted to change the strengths, now that's a value judgment, right? You're saying there's, in this case, there's 3 things that go into something being attractive, right? But I value or weight price more than I do delivery delay. If I can get a better price, I'm willing to wait, right? Or I don't want to wait. I value getting it immediately very high, right? Or functionality. I don't care what it costs. I don't care when I get it. I want it to have all these features, right? I've custom ordered my vehicle and I want, a sunroof and, whatever the functionality is, right? So you can weight them equally. That's in some sense the safest way to do it. Or you can, in a game, in the what do you call it? The briefing, as opposed to the debriefing, before somebody plays the game, you could say, here's how you'll be scored. There's a scoring metric, and you can attach the weights that you want to it. And then you play the game and, it's their value that's in there. When it's over, if you have such a game, let's say on a server, and you have 10,000 people play it, you could find the average weighting for each attribute and say, well, here's kind of the consensus weighting, and here's your weighting, and here's the score. Here's your score the way you weighted it, and here's your score if it was weighted according to everybody, right? And then here's your score if it's equal, everything is equally weighted. You could show it several different ways, and then during the debrief, talk about that, right? Well, what does that mean? Right? So yeah, Najla, go ahead.
Could you introduce a table function to say, like, based on your income, you might care less about price, and based on
so could you make so you want
based
the
on,
weights
like,
to change
based on the number of hours that you work per week, you may care less about delivery delay, for
so
instance.
you want are you asking if you can make them endogenous rather than exogenous? They're just constants.
Right, where it's almost introducing like an agent-based modeling sort of element, but where you're saying, based on different attributes that people might have, economic attributes, you could change.
So the short answer is yes. They don't have to be constants. You could have them. You could have a normal value that modified by a table function that changes things based on pressures elsewhere in the system or factors elsewhere in the system. Yes, you can do that. Every time you add a loop, it gets more complicated, but yes, 100%. So,
That would
you got to be
closest to reality, probably.
Yeah. So we don't want to model the system. We want to model a problem from the system's perspective. So you always have to balance. This is not specifically for this instance. Yes, you can make it endogenous, and that very well might be a good idea, the weightings. But as a general principle, every time you get as a modeler the idea that, hey, I can add another loop here and make more stuff endogenous, you're making the model ever more complicated and difficult to understand and control. When something happens and somebody says, why did that happen? You're like, oh, I don't know. So you have to be, you got to be careful that there's, you start running the risk of modeling the system rather than a problem. The first time I ever met Forrester, did I tell you the story? It was 1983, and I was a student, and I attended the System Dynamics Conference, and I went to the first session, plenary session. Everybody was there. And I'm like trying to see who's there. Anybody I ever heard of, name tags, who's somebody famous? I don't know. And suddenly there he is. Oh, he had a halo, golden light shining on him. There's Jay standing leaning against the wall of the auditorium. Like there's stairs as you go up the auditorium. He's like leaning against the wall and he has all his papers and stuff. And I go up and I introduce myself. I'm a student. And I said, I found out about system dynamics. I want to model this. I'm going, blah, 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 he's just standing there like, Then I stop. I finish whatever the hell I was saying to the poor man, and there's silence. Well, little did I know that's how Jay always operated. You'd ask him something and there'd be silence because he was thinking. He didn't just blurt out an answer. He'd think about it first. Wow, imagine that. Somebody thinks before they speak. But I didn't know him. I just went up to him, the great man, right? And then there's silence. I'm like, do I bow? Do I retreat? Do I make eye contact? What do I do? What do I do? And then he finally says something. He says, well, he goes, if you can do that and all that in 5 stocks or less, you're an expert. I modeled the world in 5 stocks. And he walked away. And I was like, what does he mean? What does he mean? He gave me a riddle. I don't understand. So what he was saying, because I'm going, blah, blah, and he's like, Just simple first. Don't go build this gigantic
What were you saying to him? What was the model that you were pitching to him?
I don't remember. I'd have to guess. I had this dissertation idea that nobody would let me do. It was probably that, but I don't remember. But anyway, my point is, the larger point is that, so yes, you can always make a constant endogenous, and that often is a good idea. But you have to always, whenever you have the urge to do that, add a loop, because the system dynamic song is close the loop. So yes, we want to do that, is to say, okay, if I do that, how much more complicated, because you're not going to just add one loop. It's going to create other loops. It's like crazy how many loops that can be created by just adding one obvious loop, right? So you just want to be careful before you run ahead and do that, because you might be making yourself more work than you had anticipated. But yes, you can make a constant endogenous, 100%. Okay, so let me finish off old Michael Bean here. So one of my former students, so when Michael Bean graduated, he went to work for PowerSim. First of all, he runs Foreo now, but he went to work for PowerSim in Norway. And so did my student. Well, I should say she went to school there, and then she worked for PowerSim as a student, and then when she got out of school. But she, of course, knew Mike Bean, and he knew me, and she goes, oh, my undergraduate Professor Redzicki. And we learned the Bean formulation from you, and Professor Redzicki said you taught it to him. And Mike Bean was like, what? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. He had no recollection of him showing me this. But so here's the key to the Bean formulation. You notice we have table functions here. In this case, it's going from northwest to southeast. So as our price goes above their price, the effect goes down. No good. Right? Delivery delay, same thing. Functionality, opposite. The more functionality, the more attractive. Good thing. Notice the vertical scale has to always be the same. What did I have here? I had it 0, but it's supposed to be the same. I don't know why I had that's probably a snafu. It's supposed to be 0 here for you know what? It probably should be like this. It was like 0.16, just 0 on the scale here is what did I do here? 0, 0. Yeah, 0.16. It should probably be 0 here, and then 0.16 down here. Wherever it is. Something like that. I probably shouldn't have changed it. It was probably just fine, and I screwed it up. It doesn't really matter. I will rerun here. So the table functions, yeah, it didn't really change it. So the table functions have to all be the same. All the same vertical. You can't have one going from 0 to 10 and another one from 0 to 2 and -1 to 1 and stuff like that. They have to all have the same vertical scale. And then there's this craziness in here. Turns out this is a geometric average. And Bean was like, why are you calling it a Bean thing? It's a geometric. I said, well, you never told me what the hell it's called. So there's a lot going on here. let's not worry about it. It's on the website if you want to play around with this thing. And again, when I must have done this with the wizard because everything is shoved together here, so it's very hard to see. So, you know, you'll see it's not, once you take the time to pull it apart, you'll see it's not crazy to understand. It's just, but you know, let's not take the time to do that now. But it's a very nice formulation, okay? And you can use it combined with the simplest resource resource allocator to handle or to mesh the concepts together, or at least in this case I did. Okay, so what else do we have here? So being attractiveness. Okay, so then you get into the big arm wrestling match between Dave Peterson, who runs Ventana, who created Vensim. He's one of the pioneers of Vensim. He's a genius. He actually runs it with his wife, Laura Peterson. And Andy Ford and George Backus, who advocated the McFadden approach. We've already looked at McFadden. We'll reiterate that. So basically, if we go to Vensim's allocation function here, they call it alloc-P. So in Vensim, it's called alloc-P, allocation by priority. And this comes from a study that was done by, the hell was the guy's name? Wood. It's the Wood algorithm, William T. Wood, WTW. It's the Wood algorithm that is embodied in alloc-P, allocation by priority in Vensim. Now, I think I've only used this once on a consulting job, and it's kind of clunky. So I don't use it very often. I think there's a similar sort of thing in Stella. I can't remember because I don't use it very often. But bear with me. This is one of these things that if you really need it, take the time to decipher it. I'm not sure how many people actually use it, but let's go through this. So in economic models, there's often a need to represent, I'm just checking the clock here, represent the allocation of a possibly limited supply to a number of demand entities. It is often desirable to represent the allocation of a demand among competing suppliers. Although the two kinds of problems, demand allocation and supply allocation, seem to be different, they can be effectively solved by the Wood algorithm. Okay, so you have demands, and here's the key: priorities, allocation by priority. Okay. The alloc-P function is used in conjunction with the market-P function and finds a market priority at which the market clears and uses this to determine allocation. So general strategy, avoid doing something stupid. Okay. There are several standard approaches to modeling allocation, but each formulation has at least one important flaw. For example, this is the first one we looked at tonight. Okay, that's the simplest one, right? So let's see. So AI is the attractiveness, or this is demand 1, demand 2, demand 3. This is total demand. And this is the sum of all the demands. Okay. So Dave Peterson calls this the attractiveness. So just to refresh your memory real quick. So this is what he's calling attractiveness 1, attractiveness 2, attractiveness 3. I called it demand 1, demand 2, demand 3. Same thing. That's what he's showing us here. Okay, so this is the first one here. This formula has many desirable properties, but it fails one constraint. It is possible for a tiny supplier to capture the entire market. For example, suppose the demand is the total global demand for word processing software. Suppose further, there are only two competitors, Microsoft and Joe Bob's. Microsoft is a worldwide giant. Joe Bob's is two teenage brothers named Joe and Bob operating out of their parents' kitchen. Dave's funny. If Joe and Bob managed to write a better, more attractive product than Microsoft, it's been done before, remember Intuit, then the above formula will immediately award a majority of the market to Joe Bob's. We can overcome this problem in two ways. One would be to include measures of visibility in the attractiveness number. In that case, Joe Bob's product might be best, but its attractiveness would be tiny because of lack of word of mouth and advertising. So that's the Bass model we're going to get to next time. But what if they get some stupid publicity from a review in a magazine? To do this right, we'd have to include the attractiveness, the effect of Joe Bob's overloaded telephones, etc. As this example suggests, the allocation problem turns out to be trickier than it seems. Okay, so now they say, here's how to do it better. AllocP. It was developed originally by William Wood in response to a challenge to find an algorithm that meets all the desired properties for both realism and flexibility. So they go through here. They go through every possible permutation where the simpler one could fail. Okay. Some of these, the other one fulfilled, but not all of them. Okay. So this is the one where the simple one failed. Under conditions of shortages, uniquely low priority sector should receive very little or nothing. Joe Bob gets stiffed. So they go through a bunch. Now they're trying to explain it, or Dave Peterson's trying to explain how the Wood algorithm works without looking at an algorithm. So we needn't today concern ourselves with this, but if you want to, you can take a look. And then they're going through the code, and it's implemented in C. So good luck. Do you know C? Have at it. So I believe William Wood developed the Wood algorithm to allocate electricity usage. Okay, so at like if you're running a electrical grid, and there's demands for the electricity from Niagara Falls or wherever your generating station, whatever, and who gets the electricity and when and all that stuff. Okay, now in this discussion over here of resource allocation, when this took place, 1999, just a couple of weeks ago, you see all the people weighing in on various formulations here. Why not the simple? Use the simple. And Hines and George are going back and forth. Now George Backus weighs in. George is a very, very good modeler. Okay, so George wanted to use this. So George Backus is going to box George Richardson. Okay, but note that he finds a problem here. Okay, again, I'm not going to read it all tonight. You can read it on your own. And like I say, it's kind of a delightful bantering back and forth by these luminaries. But what George and Andy Ford advocate is using the McFadden approach, okay, not AllocP. So George, he's a pretty smart guy. He's familiar with the AllocP function in Vensim is actually the sorted dispatch function used in industrial engineering, most commonly used for dispatching power plants when there are no other constraints than cost minimization. This cycles da-da-da. So he goes through. So he's acknowledging the AllocP function, but he basically says better is to use the McFadden formulation. Now here comes Dave Peterson. The tone of George Backus's comments is brilliant, but the substance contains a couple of errors which ought to be corrected. And on it goes. Okay, so Dave is going to defend the Wood algorithm in his software package, Vensim. Somewhere along the way, Sturman weighs in and says, look, are you trying? Oh, Nathan Forster's weighing in. Will Glass Hossein is weighing in. He's at 409 now. Oh, he says he's saying something to me. I don't remember why he was saying something to me. Okay, so back we go. And so there's more George Richardson. Jack Homer and I have been corresponding off on the side. They're irritated. Right. Everline's going to weigh in. Okay. Who else is weighing in here? Brian James from General Dynamics. I don't know him. George Backus is going to come back and says, no. It might ultimately be shown that Dave Peterson is correct in his perspective, but I do not believe the objections he raises bear out. Okay, so back and forth we're going here. Somewhere Sturman is going to weigh in. Somewhere, as I remember. Still Sturman. Sturman has finally had enough of listening to this stuff, and he's going to weigh in. Okay, and basically what he's saying is, are we modeling a sort of a machine, or are we modeling people? And George Backus's approach is what people do, and Dave's is what sort of machines do. And he goes, that's kind of so John is not brief. He goes into a lot of detail here. Okay. And then I agree with you, John, and I don't know what the hell happened here back in the day. All right, you get the idea. You really should, these things I've posted, these debates, these discussions, not just on this, but other topics, are absolutely, in my opinion, phenomenal. All right, I'm looking at the clock here. We didn't get through learning curves and diffusion models, or let alone discrete formulation. So we need at least one more week to do that. There was probably too much discussion about the details of ham radio. Oh, what the heck? But again, I want to leave everyone this evening with the following thought, which I harp on all the time. I'm lecturing to you about how to drive or how to swim, but you've got to get in the pool or get behind the wheel and start practice driving in a parking lot somewhere, or get in the shallow end and say, well, he told me to raise my arm up and turn my head. What happens if I do that? Oh, I got water in my nose, or what? You got to start downloading these things and goofing around with them and reading the papers or reading the discussions and say, oh, Radzicki did this. What if I do this? Is it different? Or I got a situation, maybe I can use this. Would it work? What if I modified it a little bit and played around with it a little bit? That's the only way you learn, right? And then before you dasn't start hooking these things together until you, dasn't is a Wisconsin term, sorry. You should not. Suzanne's been to Wisconsin. She knows that's got to be true. You don't want to be hooking these things together until you understand them. In isolation, goof around with them. And then when you understand what they can do and can't do, hook them together, right? And read the wisdom of the experts when they're weighing in on this stuff, because it's cool to read them bickering with one another, but also they're making good points. They're not idiots, right? They're scoring well on each other. Okay. All right. Any other thises or that's? Because I know it's probably, enough of this already. Okay. Well, with that, I'll leave you to it, and we'll reconvene next Monday.
Very good.
All right. We'll see you.
y'all
Bye.
later.